You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
When Captain America lost his mighty shield. I know, that's not the song. But in 1974, it kind of was. Because Watergate, yes, affected not only the media, the politics, and the TV viewers, the senators, the people, but it affected comic books. And in particular, Captain America.
Former White House Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman found guilty today on 5 counts in the Watergate cover-up trial. Former White House domestic.
I am so glad I get to talk about Quince on My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. I have a pair of blue jeans from them that look better, hold up nicer, and fit better than many of those jeans with the brand names that you know about, especially because some of those key brand names just aren't getting it done these days the way they used to. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Still, even with the great inflation, still Quince is getting it done. Elevate your summer wardrobe. Go to quince.com/myhist for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/MYHIST for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/myhist.
Zootopia 2 has come home to Disney Plus.
Let's go!
Get ready for a new case.
We're gonna crack this case and prove we're the greatest partners of all time!
New friends.
You are...
Gary the Snake.
And your last name?
The Snake.
Dream Team.
New habitats.
Zootopia has a secret reptile population.
You can watch the record-breaking phenomenon at home.
You're clearly working at
Zootopia 2, now available on Disney Plus, rated PG.
Affairs advisor John Ehrlichman, 4 counts, guilty.
If you see reruns of television shows, I'm thinking of Sanford and Son, I'm thinking of the Jeffersons, you're going to hear a lot of Watergate jokes. But Captain America uncovers a vast fictional conspiracy reaching the highest levels of government, including the president. In fact, the unnamed leader, strongly implied to be like Nixon-like figure, is so distraught that the corruption that he's brought on is going to be exposed that he commits suicide. And the effect on Captain America is devastating. He loses faith in America. He loses faith in the country's institution. He temporarily abandons the Captain America identity entirely. And there's a new superhero of sorts created. Nomad. He's still like a really big, muscular guy, but he's got a new, darker suit. No American flag. At this point in Marvel's history, Stan Lee had been relegated to the background. There was a new artist. He was given control over it. And they were having an issue selling Captain America because nothing's more establishment than Captain America. He's got the flag on his uniform and such. So this was one of many manifestations of the public culture, a way of not being so establishment. Our product is with you, readers. The Incredible Hulk has monsters coming out of the White House, and the Hulk has to fight them. You got the message. Everybody's a little traumatized by the scandal. And among those that are frustrated is the grand jury. We don't talk about the grand jury much, and we should. The grand jury is put on the Watergate case. That's the best way to describe it. We talked about that moment where one of the Watergate break-in doers, the burglar, McCord, sends a letter to the judge that says perjury has occurred in this trial, right as he's doing his sentencing. And the judge is like, what's going on here? I can't have justice when the White House is interfering, possibly. And the wheels of the justice system are turning. already serving is a grand jury. They've been working on various little kind of cases because this is Washington, D.C. The grand jury is federal, and Judge Sirica is a federal judge. And Vladimir Pregel is appointed the jury foreman. When you commit a crime in D.C., the jury of your peers are people in D.C. That's what happens. They get to work. They work a lot. And at the end, Vladimir Pregel, who's the only one of these over 20 Watergate jurors, grand jurors, will speak out. Really, the others have not on the record. What does he say? The foreman is very disappointed. He doesn't think that justice was served. He doesn't think it was getting served prior to Ford's pardon, and then he thought that President Ford's pardon of former President Nixon really meant that justice was derailed. He didn't think that prosecutor Leon Jaworski had any intention of prosecuting Nixon when he and his colleagues so clearly could see evidence that this wasn't a person behaving according to the law, whatever your politics are. And indeed, Pregel will take a step that wasn't necessarily authorized by the prosecutor. Here's the New York Times from July 27, 1973. The public got its first close look yesterday at the federal grand jury that has been deliberating secretly for months in the Watergate case. The jury was escorted into the courtroom of John Sirica of United States District Court as part of the proceeding by Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor, to force President Nixon to release his tapes of confidential conversations. The foreman, with whom Judge Sirica held a brief colloquy, is Vladimir Nicholas Pregel, a 46-year-old Yugoslav refugee who has worked for the Library of Congress since 1957. He's employed as an analyst of international trade and finance. Mr. Pregel, the article says, is dressed in muted but mod clothing, including patterned double-knit slacks, and he spoke with poise and calm. He wears a Van Dyke beard. Like the population of the city, the grand jury is predominantly black. Of the 23 members, 3 were absent. Of the 20 others, 14 are black and 6 are white. 13 members are women, 7 are men. In addition to Mr. Pregel, the members of the panel were identified as Annie Bell Alford, Leila Bard, Ellen Brown, Carolyn Butler, Elaine Elland, Maurice Glover, Dorothy Gray, George Gross, Wallace Hawkins, Christopher Hopkins, Ruth Loveridge, Arthur McLean, Ethel Peoples, Susie Robinson, Catherine Smith, George Stockton, Julie White, Naomi Williams, and Priscilla Woodruff. This is 23 people, and they'll meet more than 100 times in the first 18 months of a 2-year run of this grand jury. Now, you might be asking a question, why do we know their names? We're not supposed to know grand jury names, right? And that is because of a special circumstance that is revealed in this article, is that the judge brings them before because he wants the jury individually polled, that they demand the tapes from Nixon, the tapes that were secretly his Oval Office being recorded. They are demanding it to a person, not the judge. It's not the judge asking for this. It's not just the prosecutor asking for this, not just the jury foreman asking for this. He polls the jury just to be sure and to give that extra weight. If you deny this request, you're denying these people as well. So several times, they're not remembered as much as Woodward and Bernstein, but several times this grand jury will get its role. Ordinary citizens. As we said, they're already impaneled. They were looking at, oh, this guy hit this guy sold drugs, and then the moment of the McCord letter hits. Something to understand as the news reports of Watergate are coming out, and drip by drip, there's some articles in the Post of what reporters can find out. They have access to a lot more evidence and information, but they can't say a word about it. In a sense, this is the first group of Americans to really be angry with Nixon over the Watergate evidence. And his administration, and other members of his administration, that a form of this jury will end up, after it changes, will end up indicting. This is a little different from what you may see in the movies or whatever. They are not sequestered. This is a jury that goes home. They just cannot say a word to anyone about the proceedings in that room. But they are pretty angry. In fact, Pragal writes a letter directly to Nixon at the White House, saying that he should appear before them and engage in direct questioning. The written answers are insufficient for this matter. Nixon refuses. At a certain point, Pragal does a poll of the jury. Hands up. Who here is for indicting Nixon right now based on the evidence we've already seen? And according to his recollection, nearly all supported them. Some of them raised both their hands, he remembered. But this is secret. This isn't in court. This isn't in the public. The media doesn't see this. However, Carl Bernstein of the Woodward and Bernstein duo has a lead, and he wants to pin the story down. The prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, does not want this getting out. He's not ready to indict. In fact, as events are going to turn out, he's following that Justice Department policy that became so famous again during the first Trump administration, that the Justice Department does not indict sitting presidents. He didn't think it was a good idea. We're going to talk about prosecutors in a second. He doesn't want the story out because if it is, he knows there'll be public pressure. There'll be moral pressure. But Bernstein has it, and Jaworski just calls the Washington Post and says, please don't run this story. It's going to be hurtful to this case if you do. We're not ready to do this yet. The Washington Post is not really convinced just on Jaworski's word, but here's the thing. Bernstein only has one source. Policy of the paper is to have at least two sources for something of this. So they don't run it. But indeed, Bernstein was onto something. The Nixon jurors did do a show of hands. The service on the grand jury questioning some of these big, powerful people that served with the president in the White House about a crime they may have committed affects a person. Pragal, the foreman, his wife says he was a very secretive person. He gets married to her in 1980. This is, 6 years after, and he doesn't talk about it till like 1984. 10 years after the case. 7 months go by, and the grand jury finally indicts 7 top Nixon aides, including his campaign chairman and his former attorney general. Pragal, because he was named, he got letters. One Wichita woman wrote the grand jury foreman and told him that she and many others are frustrated. All these lawyers are out to get Nixon. You ought to be tarred and feathered. Why won't you stop this terrible thing? It's ruining our country, at home and abroad. Try taking up the dirt and mistake of the other presidents. None are perfect. On the other hand, after Ford pardons Nixon, not only are these jurors outraged, justice wasn't done and wouldn't be done, but a woman from Cary, North Carolina writes to Pragal saying, this can't happen in our country. I urge you to inform the public of all the facts if no one else will. I'm sick with outrage. A federal grand jury is technically independent. They can order witnesses, even if the prosecutor doesn't ask. They could vote on indictments, but in practice, they really follow the prosecutor. And they'd be really flailing a bit if the prosecutor was not on board. Grand juries are often described the other way, that they do whatever the prosecutor wants, that they're able to indict a ham sandwich. So the prosecutor dominates the process, and it's a lower standard. The jury is just suggesting things that need a trial. They need a prosecution. They can vote no bill. It does happen. A lot of the reason it doesn't happen, which kind of inflates the stats towards the prosecution and the ham sandwich side, is that generally prosecutors don't like to present a case to a grand jury if they're going to get a no bill. It doesn't look very good. But in any case, it can work the other way, but rarely does. And in this case, there were a lot of grumblings. And so what the prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, settled with unofficially with the jury and with the judge is that Nixon would be named but not indicted. The famous phrase, non-indicted co-conspirator. So he was part of a conspiracy, really should be charged, but because of the procedural rules, because of his position, constitutional thoughts, which arguments you could make, he wasn't indicting. However, that wasn't enough. He also submitted a, quote, roadmap here's how you get from A to Z. Here's essentially, if you were charging him as an impeachment process, here's what you would do. With that, the jury at least feels good about what they've done. Nixon's not impeached. He resigns. In some ways, it was the only successful impeachment in American history. Because of the pardon, he's not prosecuted, but the grand jury that takes over from this one in 1975 will continue to investigate Watergate. And they do call Nixon forward, and he's not required, but as a voluntary matter, he comes. Pragal is very angered when he hears this transcript. And I've looked at part of the transcript as to Nixon's grand jury testimony in 1975 is a bit weak, a bit self-serving. The prosecutors, they do ask some questions. They try to get a hold of why he did, authorize this burglary, or why anyone in his administration did. Why did you do it? What did you want? They try to get what happened with the 18 and a half minutes, what was on that, who handled those tapes. To the extent the 1975 prosecutors are doing anything, they're trying to establish that there was a legal framework for the handling of the tapes.
Good evening. Some of the defendants in the Watergate cover-up trial left the federal courthouse here in Washington last night expressing wishes for a happy new year. But most of them were not surprised when their own new year began today with the jury finding all but one of them guilty. The verdict came 2.5 years after the Watergate break-in and 13.5 weeks after the trial began. In those weeks, more than 12,000 pages of transcript were accumulated as more than 80 witnesses appeared, and 34 of those famous White House tapes were played.
This is after Nixon receives a pardon from President Ford. And that pardon is very broad. It says that he can't be convicted of any crimes that he committed or may have committed while he was president, and it goes up to September 8th, 1974. So what you find in this testimony, first of all, Nixon comes voluntarily, which is your first red flag that maybe this isn't going to be exactly a prosecution-friendly testimony. Obviously, since there's been a pardon, they're not going to prosecute Nixon. They still will be able to prosecute others in his administration, and they also want the right verdict for history. Okay, Nixon's out of office. Was it the right thing? For instance, we know that in June 20th, 1972, there's a piece of the tape that's missing for that day, an 18.5-minute gap. It doesn't sound like much, but it's a really big deal when they subpoena the tapes and find that it's missing. That's a pretty significant amount of testimony. But there's more. This second jury, this is not Pragal at this point, it's a second jury, and the judge seeks out a tape expert. And here's what the tape expert says about the famous missing 18.5-minute gap. Magnetic signatures that we have measured directly on the tape show that the buzzing sounds put on the tape in the process of erasing and re-recording at least 5, and perhaps as many as 9, separate and contiguous segments. Hand operation of the keyboard controls of the UHER 5000 recorder was involved in starting and again in stopping the recording of each segment. The magnetic signatures observed in the tape show conclusively show that the 18.5-minute section could not have been produced by any single continuous operation. Further, whether the foot pedal was used or not, the recording controls must have been used in the making of each segment. Okay, so when this piece is missing from the subpoenaed tapes, what the argument is that Rosemary Woods must have messed up, and sometimes she had to grab something from her desk and her foot went off the pedal. And this is gets to be known as the famous Rosemary Woods stretch. It's actually recreated in various hearings on Watergate. What these experts show is that this wasn't one incident. This wasn't accidental. This was revisited. They also detect that there is sound on the tape. They can't tell what that sound is. They have no way, at least in 1974, and there hasn't been any action on this afterwards, of determining what that sound is saying, but they can tell it's a human voice that has been erased from the tape. Whoever erased the tape repeatedly started and stopped the recorder. That undermined the notion that the entire gap resulted from an inadvertent mistake. It would have to be like 5 to 9 mistakes. We know of no technique that could recover intelligible speech from the buzz section. So the prosecutors now know that the missing tape was significant because of when it was recorded. Their working theory was that Nixon, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Dean, Mitchell, and others had returned to Washington. And this is the day, it's a working day, when they're in a position to discuss the Watergate break-in that had happened Friday night into Saturday morning. Investigators concluded that there was every reason to infer that Watergate had been discussed during the meeting. We'll never know. That's not what's been on that missing part of the tape has never been found. Nixon is asked about the handling of the tapes again and again in the testimony. He's dodgy about it. They have his calendar. They have his TikTok, the presidential actions for the day, that there were such talks during this time period when that tape could have been recorded. There were meetings with Ehrlichman and other people. This is why they have this. In addition to the tapes, prosecutors were pursuing another avenue, one that receives less attention in popular Watergate histories. We know about the break-in, which is essentially, when we say the DNC headquarters, we got to remember this is Lawrence O'Brien's desk. So they're really going after him because simultaneously there's an IRS investigation of Lawrence O'Brien. And prosecutors are concerned the White House may have attempted to use that against Larry O'Brien. They institute this investigation right at the time that the Democratic convention's going on. They schedule an interview with the IRS that obviously he can't attend and doesn't. Prosecutors examined timelines of IRS interviews, reports, meetings, and communications among White House aides. Some notes proposed leaking damaging information about Lawrence O'Brien. Others discussed obtaining an external tip, getting information to O'Brien privately, or planting gossip rather than making allegations publicly. One of the memorandums that prosecutors have in this file, 1975, argued that dropping something on O'Brien will have far more effect now than at a later time. It doesn't sound very much like law enforcement language. This sounds like political pressure. When they asked Nixon about this, here's what he said. So the Special Prosecutor's Office is only interested in IRS harassment activities insofar as it deals with Mr. O'Brien. It's not interested in any harassment that the IRS may have done or is doing in regard to, say, me, my friends, or anything like that. And then he asked the prosecutor. Now, Nixon knows full well that the prosecutor must answer that he's a prosecutor. It's a specific investigation. They don't go all over the place. It's to investigate this matter. So Nixon cuts him off. I think you have answered my question. He doesn't answer the allegation about O'Brien. He suggests, he doesn't deny it. He suggests that it's being done on other people as well. When prosecutors get close to the issue of using donor money and political influence, Nixon volunteers a denial before the prosecutor can make the accusation. I want to be quite categorical on that. Influence has no reference to government contracts. No reference whatsoever to a favor in terms of something that would involve a payoff. Nixon instead argued that when he was talking about rewarding donors, he's talking about with, say, pictures with the president, visits to the White House, access. He goes on in this testimony about two things that kind of help his case. One, he talks a lot about, it's very common in all administrations for White House to take donations from a person, then make him an ambassador, right? Ambassadors aren't always chosen for their negotiating skill or their language skills or their foreign skills. They're staffed to do that. The ambassador is often donated to the campaign. And then there's a part of Nixon's testimony that's only recently been revealed, where he talks about how he was wronged, how he was surveilled by the military. And yes, it turns out that it's pretty likely that a men in the Navy on possible instructions from military brass was spying on the White House and reporting back to the Pentagon. This was kept classified until recently. So it was part of this testimony, but it was blanked out until recently. It's an interesting story, of course, but it's a little self-serving, and Nixon keeps bringing it up, and the prosecutor seems to want to, you don't want to open up that can of worms. But really, it appears Nixon probably does from what he says, because he says, I just hope I had to do things. I just hope other presidents don't have to deal with this. It's a little self-serving, but it's also something prosecutors have to deal with because it did happen, and Nixon and his administration did not pursue a case against him because they didn't want it revealed for national security reasons. I think the last point to talk about is a little esoteric legal point, but it's Philip Lacrovara's memo to the other Watergate prosecutors. And it just presents what they were up against. I don't think it's pretty clear to people. Watergate seems like a slam dunk case, but they were very concerned that, first of all, the Watergate Special Prosecution Unit would be attacked politically. They already were. Senator Strom Thurmond was out there attacking the amount of Democrats who were in the prosecution and saying that Nixon could never get a fair trial. Ron Ziegler, the Nixon press secretary, was saying similar things. This is a prosecution of his enemies. Lacrovara talks about this in the memo. The defense attorneys could crumble the entire Watergate case because a lot of it's based on people who were part of the conspiracy. And so if you can get a juror thinking that, this guy is only talking because he's getting leniency, well, you've got John Dean, you've got McCord. These are two people who participated in these events, and they're talking so that they don't get in trouble. That's not a credible witness always for every juror. And at this time, the court was definitely going to instruct jurors that they had to take that into account. And a defense lawyer is also going to attack it. So all of these things are on the prosecutor's mind as they pursue this case. And when you think of a decision like to make Nixon an unindicted conspirator, as much as that angered the original jury, this is part of the thinking behind that. Nixon's defense lawyer was a man named James St. Clair. He's a Boston Brahmin, very, very establishment guy. He wasn't going to go in there like a political attack dog. He argued about the Constitution, think about the long-term effects here of what you're doing, think about executive privilege and the need to preserve it. He wasn't like a Roy Cohn or someone like that. He wasn't attacking, the case against Nixon in the court of public opinion. Far from it. And St. Clair would preserve his own reputation and have a pretty good career after that. We don't know what would have happened if it was kind of an era of smash-mouth politics. You did have some people on the Nixon side, some of them like Maurice Stans, who were Commerce Secretary, who was convicted ultimately, wrote a book saying the whole Watergate thing was just a way to overturn the 1972 landslide. Wow. The Democrats found a clever way to
Could AI help you do more of what you love? Workday is the AI platform for HR and finance that actually knows your business. We help you handle the have-to-dos so you can focus on the can't-wait-to-dos. It's a new Workday.
overturn a landslide of 49 states. And that's not a majority opinion at all in the 1970s, but it's out there. And my only argument would be, how did Nixon's enemies convince him or his attorney general to authorize a break-in into the Watergate? Still not sure about that part. But you do hear that. And so we don't know if, you had the kind of politics, the kind of, mistrust of media sources and everybody kind of in their own fractured media and what they agree on, facts that they agree on. I don't know how Watergate goes, really, given that. I do think it goes that people like Dean are already under attack, would be even more. The whole prosecution would be under attack. There's a whole discussion about how you're talking about things we might do for contributors, things that we might do for campaign money, and look at ambassadors. And I think he uses this example because it's very positive for him. It's that if you look at the example of ambassadors, in every presidency I know of, contributors have been appointed to non-career posts in considerable numbers. It's an all presidents do it type defense, because it's very well known that who do you pick for ambassadors? The people with the best diplomatic skill, if you can. But you also pick the people who contributed to your campaign. And since there isn't, I don't want to say, especially the top and best ambassadorial jobs is you have to be good. But, a lot of people could do the job. And some of the people in big money circles have these kind of social skills, diplomatic skills in any case. So you put the big contributors in. That's his point. He keeps saying things like that. He keeps giving information that would deny a perjury charge later, like saying things like, just so you know off the bat, I have a bad memory. These are events that happened years ago, and I never kept any records. Well, he didn't have to. There was a taping system. He constantly says that things he say might be terribly damaging to the United States. He gets into a story about a military spying operation where and Nixon talks almost without the prosecutors liking this discussion very much. He slips into the conversation, the Radford spying affair. Radford is a Navy yeoman who spies on the White House, essentially. Who does he spy for? Not another country, but for military leaders in the Pentagon. This project was the most highly sensitive that we had while I was president. The Joint Chiefs were not happy, all of them, with Nixon's détente policies towards the Soviet Union and China. Nixon distrusts the military leadership. This is a perfect example for Nixon of this Cold War's going on. There's a lot of things you don't know about. That's a can of worms I had to deal with. And the military was spying on me, but they weren't the left wing. So it wasn't just hippies I had to deal with. I wasn't just trying to get my enemies. It's also the military didn't like some of the more, say, liberal foreign policies that I had. They were out to get me, and I had to be careful of that. I feared a trial would expose secret diplomacy involving China, Pakistan, and the Vietnam War. But Radford knew the details of Kissinger's secret China negotiations. He knew sensitive Cold War discussions. We didn't pursue it because it just would have made the country look bad, is essentially what he says. And the prosecutors, because they're hearing about something that's a crime, so they have to ask questions. But there's also a tendency to get Nixon to move on to another subject because they feel like this is yet another kind of self-serving point. So this is the kind of stuff that makes Pragal, the original jury foreman, mad that he wishes that they were able to ask some real questions of Nixon's.
Meet the new iSIMS, the single talent acquisition platform that's fully future-ready. It works wherever and however you hire, with insights no one else offers. One solution that fits seamlessly into your existing tech stack, which is why IT and HR leaders trust it. With the best of enterprise-grade software and AI, iSIMS helps you identify and secure the right talent faster. iSIMS, powering exceptional hiring. Learn more at isims.com.